Welcome to Stories After Midnight. Today we're going to be reading I Care for an Old Woman with Dementia Who Thinks Her Dead Husband is Still Alive. I'm starting to believe her, by The White Mare from Reddit. I hope you enjoy this story. Let me know if you do in the comments below or wherever you are. And a huge shout out to my patrons for helping make this episode possible. Let's get started. It was my stepfather who wanted me to get a job. Even part-time, he said, was better than rotting away in my room. I would have been perfectly happy spending my last summer before I turned 18 doing just that. But, unfortunately, it wasn't an option. On this particular day, I stood by the cramped entrance to our small town's one supermarket, gazing up at the employees' wanted poster stapled to the bulletin board. Glancing over at the dead-eyed workers slouched behind the tills across from me, I decided against retail. Scanning the notices, I eventually found an offer that piqued my interest. Friends of the Elderly, a small local charity set up by our town's nursing home. Volunteers would be assigned to a pensioner with a few, if any, living friends or relatives. They'd be sent to them one day out of the week and spend an hour or two keeping them company. The work was unpaid, sure, but it was hardly work. Most importantly, it'd leave me functionally free for the entire summer. It wasn't what my stepfather had in mind, but I'd like to see him try and talk me out of something like this in front of my mother. I tore a slip of paper with a phone number printed on it from the poster and cycled home. Following a brief phone call, I visited the nursing home and talked with the kind man there who was organizing the whole system. After that initial in-person rendezvous, the rest of the correspondence was done via email. In early June, my position was finalized, and I was paired with a lovely old lady named Agatha. Agatha lived alone in a musty house near the edge of town, not too far from one of my friends. My stepdad was apprehensively proud of me for finding fulfilling work like this, and paid for my first bus fare out to her. Fishing back in my mind for what the man at the care home told me, I managed to remember exactly where she lived and hopped off the bus right outside of the driveway. Two weathered marble horse-head statues mounted the stone pillars that led into the wall that encircled her property. Much of her land was covered in trees, and the divided wall was the only clue to where her estate ended and the surrounding forest began. I pushed open the old iron gate, which grinded like stiff cogs. Squeezing between the narrow gap, I began to stroll up the poorly paved path that led to Agatha's house. Her lawn was a jungle of weeds and discarded furniture. The walk to her pastel blue door felt endless, but finally I knocked. Taking into account her poor hearing, I rang the doorbell too. I heard a muffled voice from inside, assumedly saying, "I'm coming," and before long the door swung open. A decrepitly old woman greeted me, and I responded back with a simple, "Hi, I'm Norman." She took my hand in hers and led me inside. Agatha's home smelled like dust and sherry. Her decor triggered long dormant memories of visiting my own late grandparents. As soon as the door closed, she was offering everything from sweet milk to shortbread and guided me to her equally ancient sofa in the front room. Agatha's eyes held a pure kindness, devoid of any malice. She looked at me like a beloved son. Midway through our first talk, it struck me that she might truly believe I was. The thought nearly brought tears, but I kept smiling. She spent half an hour talking about school and if I had a girlfriend. I chatted easily, knowing keeping her company was my job. When I finally asked about her, she seemed surprised but answered anyway. "Oh, it's been hard since my Strauss died," she said, putting a bony hand on my shoulder. "I feel so lonely sometimes. I suppose I have the lady from the hospital. She visits a few times a week, but she's nothing but a sourpuss." With that, Agatha threw back her head and cackled dryly. "She only ever talks about what I should and shouldn't do. Take these pills, don't go outside. Pardon my language, dear, but she treats me like a damn child." With that, Agatha looks down and sighs. Then her paper-thin lips turn up into a smile and she looks at me again. "I have you now, though, so none of that matters," she says and shakes my shoulder. I beam at her, feeling a warmth grow inside my heart. I suddenly realized how rewarding this job could be, even if it wasn't monetarily. And despite the bulging varicose veins on her forehead that looked like it could pop at any moment, and despite the fact that she spoke with the cadence similar to the hum of an old radiator, I can imagine myself spending a large part of my summer with her. Before I could reassure Agatha that I could come keep her company whenever she wanted, she stood with a crack and shuffled to the kitchen, hollering back that she was just going to make some tea. I smiled and sat patiently where I was, looking around the room inquisitively. It was like a mini museum, with every surface covered in more dusty knickknacks than I could count. There were porcelain figurines, old photographs, crystal bijoux, jars of marbles, an urn, stuffed animals, taxidermied animals, everything. Most intriguingly, an odd white hood in a glass box. I stood up and took one of the pictures from the mantel. A long dead soldier looked out from the frame. I wondered if this was Strauss, her late husband, who she mentioned in passing. I heard the friction between her slippers and the gray-blue carpet as Agatha steplessly walked back into the living room. She sat with her mug of English tea and a handful of cookies. I returned to the space next to her and showed her the portrait. "Who's this?" I asked her, both genuinely curious and trying to make conversation. She slid on her eyeglasses, which had, until then, been dangling around her neck. The lenses looked as thick as submarine's porthole. She sucked her teeth and then suddenly sat back and let out a long "ah" as she recognized him. "That's Zoran," she exclaimed. "He's my Strauss's older brother. That would have been him in the Second World War." I paused, a strange thought suddenly forming in my mind. "Was he I began, but trailed off. Agatha realized the implications of my unspoken words and frowned. "Oh, heavens, no. Oh, no, Zoran was part of the... She trailed off, losing her train of thought. After a few seconds in silence, she spoke again, and didn't stop for some time. "My Strauss came to America when he was a boy, just after the start of that horrible war. Only he and his mother made it, and she died of the consumption not long afterwards. My family took him in and taught him English. He worked and lived on our farm for the rest of his childhood and some of his adulthood. Well, I was wet behind the ears back then. I don't mind admitting it, but I still knew what love was. I loved Strauss, but my father wouldn't have it. To him, he was just like any other farm animal, I suppose. Even if he didn't think that exactly, he still made him sleep out in the barn like he was." I got comfortable in my seat and waited silently for what I expected to be something of a life story. "We eloped in 1949. Stealing is a sin, and you should do right to remember that. But we had to take money from my father. We had no choice. We took that money and used it to make something of a new life for ourselves once we got up north. We came across this town that you live in today. Back then it had doubled in size in just 4 years. They wouldn't notice us two slipping in." She suddenly drew in a deep, rasping breath. "The reason for the growth was the new factory. It was built by the government in 1945 to manufacture all the new lotions and potions they came up with during the war. Well, it had endless jobs going for it, and my Strauss took one of them. We settled down then and tried to start a family. It was all going dandy until 1954. I expected Agatha to continue after her long pause, but she didn't. She just wordlessly stared at the white cloth mask in the glass cabinet. I leaned in and put what I hoped was a soothing hand over hers. "What happened in 1954? I asked. "There was a fire at the factory," she said, the words like they were the closing line of a somber poem. Before long, she spoke again. "Most of the young men and boys died, so I should count myself lucky that my Strauss survived, and I do, of course, but I was never sure if he did. You see, he wasn't the same after it. His spirit never changed, oh no, but he was so badly burnt. It was the chemical fire that did it. The bigwigs try to blame the workers themselves for it. You know that?" "I'm so sorry," I said, using my stock reply for any tragic news. "I'm surprised you don't know. What are they teaching in these schools nowadays anyway? Nobody gives a hoot about local history." She mumbled out a few more of her qualms with the U.S. education system before I subtly reminded her that she'd been telling me about her late husband. "Oh, of course. muttered Agatha, desperately trying to collect her memories. After some time of staring off into space, she proclaimed, "Ah!" and stood. She shuffled to the shelf on which stood her late husband's urn. Next to it was a glass cabinet. There was a girl at school that I had a crush on, a major one. She was a film buff to the point where it became her personality, and would usually ask people what their favorite film was before she got their name. I recently found out that her favorite movie was David Lynch's The Elephant Man. As soon as I did, I found a way to watch it and brought it up with her the next time I saw her. Her name was Layla, and our first date was the following Monday. I bring this up just to say that when I looked in the glass cabinet, the mask I saw reminded me of the one worn by Joseph Merrick. It was made of plain white cloth, yellowed slightly with age, and had 2 eye holes cut in the shape of a squashed circle. After he got better, he found work as a groundskeeper at the high school. He took to wearing the mask so the kids didn't point and laugh at him. Kids can be so cruel sometimes, she recounted as she gazed at her Strauss's ashes. "Say, what high school do you go to?" she said as she turned to face me again. I told her and she smiled as she realized that it was the same school Strauss worked at for nearly 30 years. We sat again and she told me of how he died at only 61. It was an aggressive form of lymphoma. The sadness in Agatha's eyes as she told me it was heartbreaking. It was like she'd only heard the news of her husband's passing moments before. I put a comforting hand on her shoulder as she slipped into melancholy. As I did, I gleaned the time from my watch and realized I'd been here half an hour longer than I was supposed to be. I liked that first day with her, don't get me wrong, but when I realized the time, I got up to leave. "So soon?" Agatha asked. "I'll be back the same time next week. I'll see you then," I replied, trying not to feel like a heartless monster. She escorted me to the door and took my hand in both of hers. She took it within an inch of its life and thanked me profusely for keeping her company. Just as I turned to leave, she grabbed my wrist again. "Yugoslavia," she said, seemingly at random. "Zoran, during the war, he was a partisan." I realized she was talking about her brother-in-law I asked about earlier, and I smiled in response. I waved at her, walking down her winding driveway, a gallery of garbage among the weeds either side of me. I got the bus back just in time for dinner. "How'd it go with the crone?" my dad asked as he chewed on the fried leg of some dead bird. "It went well. Don't call her that. She was lovely, actually," I responded. "You're still here, so I see she didn't bore you to death," he said, sucking meat juice from his fingers. "She didn't, no. She was telling me about her husband, Strauss, for most of it." "Strauss?" my father repeated as he looked at me for the first time in the conversation. "As in Scarface Strauss?" "Maybe," I replied. "Where do you know him from?" "He was the groundskeeper at your high school all the way back when I went there. He used to terrify the kids. God, whenever he caught someone playing around in this freshly raked pile of leaves, he'd pull up his mask and glare at them, and always send them running back to class." The revelation that my own father was one of the cruel children Agatha mentioned didn't come as a shock. Not wanting my faith in his morals to degrade further, I didn't ask him any more questions about Strauss. Maybe another time, I thought to myself. My date with Layla went perfectly, if you were wondering. We met at the empty field near town, just us, some smokes, and the remnants of where a county fair had been set up. She blew smoke rings in my face while I tried not to cough, and we talked like we'd known each other forever. Even when she opened up about her parents' death and her uncle's addiction, I didn't mind. I just listened, saying, "I'm so sorry," when words failed. When she kissed my cheek goodbye, leaving a purple lipstick stain, I knew I was hers. I watched her walk off to the bus stop with the eyes of a lovesick puppy. Come Saturday, it was my turn to catch a bus. There was one in our town that was far from reliable. Still, before I could afford a car of my own, it was all I could peg my hopes on. I'm not the most athletic guy, especially not back then, and cycling to Agatha's seemed like an impossible task, or at least a task that'd leave me with a stitch. The old rickety beast wasn't too late that day, and I arrived at Agatha's front gate practically on time. I pushed it open and started the trek up the path to her house. Her large garden was a mess, and I wondered if she'd pay me on the side to clean it up for her. As I neared the house, I was stopped in my tracks by a low growling behind me. I turned and saw an Alsatian baring its teeth at me. Thick, steaming saliva dripped from its black gums to the paved ground beneath. I wasn't afraid of dogs, but this one made me take a wary step back. Behind me, I heard the front door open. As it did, the dog suddenly took off into the overgrown lawn off into the forest. I turned to see Agatha waiting on the doorstep, smiling absently at me. I made my way up to her and gently shook her outstretched hand. "Hey, Agatha," I said. She gripped my hand in both of hers. Her wrinkled skin felt like dry leaves. "Hello, dear. You must be Edward's son. Come in," she mumbled and led me inside. Before I could correct her, she continued. "When was the last time you visited, huh? Christmas? 87? The house has changed so much since then. Let me give you a tour." "Agatha," I began. "I'm Norman. I'm here to keep you company, remember? I was here last week." She paused at the foot of her stairs. She stared intensely at nothing in particular and began to murmur no to herself over and over again, in a voice so quiet I almost couldn't hear her. Slowly, she looked back at me. With vice-like eye contact, she faintly said, "I'll give you the tour." Then she started ascending the carpeted staircase. With no reason not to, I followed her. The musty stench that wafted through the first floor was like a thick, inescapable stench on the second. Every wall was lined with dozens of picture frames, each with a faded photo of a long-dead relative. The constant glaze of dust was like the shedded skin of a python. Someone needed to hire her a cleaner. "My Strauss loved his antiques," she said as we brushed past oak shelves stacked with archaic trinkets. "This is the guest's bedroom where you'll be staying," suggested Agatha, and waves a frail hand towards a dull wooden door to our left. I opened my mouth to correct her but bit my tongue. "And this was my Strauss's bedroom." She motioned now to the door directly to the right of the guest room. "Oh Lord, was he a snorer. I used to kick him out of bed so often because of it that he ended up just sleeping in there in the end." I chuckled politely while she conducted the rest of her tour, ending in her bedroom. It was the last room of the upstairs hallway, which ended in another vase with more dead vegetation. Above the pot was a circular window, which gave a porthole's view of the forest beyond the house. I looked up and saw the pulled-down hatch to the attic. Agatha noticed me looking and spoke. "That goes up to the attic. There's nothing but asbestos up there, so don't think about going up. Now, let me put on some tea." With that, she began to shuffle over the sickly green carpet, across the snubbed corridor and down the stairs. Looking back at some of the more interesting antiques, I followed her. I wasn't even halfway down the staircase when I heard it. I stopped. I listened closely. I could have sworn I heard a quiet bang. I listened out for it for some time, until finally Agatha called my name, my real name, and I hurried down into the lounge. I spent hours listening to Agatha's stories about our town's history. Though her memory faltered on important things, she knew every scandal, secret, and rumor about local families. Affairs, hidden children, even a devil's pact. Time flew and I nearly missed my bus. After thanking her, I rushed upstairs to her lime green themed bedroom. On my way down, I noticed the attic hatch wide open, swinging at a 90-degree angle. Assuming a faulty latch, I left without mentioning it. If I had, maybe she wouldn't have died the way she did. When I came into Agatha's house that third week, something felt different. Off. It wasn't just because I'd cycled there and my legs were burning. The atmosphere of the house was different. I called out her name and her carer came down the stairs. She greeted me with a deflated smile and told me that Agatha had taken a turn for the worst. She was in bed in her room, and I went up to her while her carer attempted to fix her lunch in the cramped kitchen. I made my way down that garishly carpeted floor into her room, where the door had been left open a crack. I pushed in and saw Agatha lying weakly on a bed. I sat on the edge of her bed, patted Agatha's arm, and asked her how she was feeling. Dozens of bottles of pills were stacked on her bedside cabinet, some spilling their contents. Surrounding them were a few half-full glasses of water and orange juice. Slowly, the old woman opened her eyes and looked at me. They were glassy and stared without any recognition. Still, she broke into a smile. "I'm wonderful, dear. Just wonderful." she replied in a raspy voice and grabbed my hand firmly. My straws came back last night. I nearly grimaced at her delusion, but hid my reaction for her sake. That's nice, I said. It was so wonderful, Agatha continued. He hasn't changed a bit. I stayed up all night talking to him just like the old days. She shook my hand, which was clasped between hers vigorously. She looked so happy. He's in his bedroom down the hall. You should pop in and introduce yourself, Agatha said, suddenly after a minute of uneasy silence. Before I could respond, her carer, who I never got the name of, walked into the room. She was carrying a steaming mug of something hot and sat on the other side of the bed. Here you go, love, Agatha's carer said, setting the cup of tea down. She spoke with a British accent which explained her affinity for tea making. Thank you, dear, the old woman rasped and took the mug, taking tentative sips. You should get some more rest, suggested the carer as she leaned across the bed and took a bottle of pills from my side. Take 2 of these and try to go to sleep. Sleep is the best healer. Agatha nodded and began to fumble a capsule or two out of the small amber-colored bottles. Her carer stood and motioned for me to follow her. I did, and as soon as we were in the hall, she spoke. I think what you're doing is great, she said, but Agatha's an ill woman. You should go home. Leave her be for a while. I nodded, understanding her reasoning. It would be hard to keep Agatha company while she's passed out on what looked to be her deathbed. The British carer patted my shoulder and walked past me and down the stairs. Soon after, I turned to follow her. As I walked down the short hall, I glanced furtively at Strauss's old room. I noticed the door was open, just a crack. That week was the best of the summer. Layla was once again unemployed and we spent the entire week together, just before we parted on Friday evening. She asked me if I was free again on Saturday. I'll be at Agatha's, I think, for most of the day at least. I'm sorry, I said forlorn. What about in the evening or morning? Layla replied. I paused and thought her question over. Eventually I said, Want to come with me? And she did. That Saturday, we walked up the path leading to Agatha's house together. When she answered the door, I noticed she looked pale. That unhealthy complexion glossed over when she saw Layla, however. In a strange way, it was comforting to see Agatha genuinely not recognize someone she didn't know. We came in and talked for a bit before I decided today was a good opportunity to work on the lawn. Agatha agreed, and Layla kept her company while I headed out. Before I did, the old woman shuffled into her kitchen, rummaged around for a while before coming back with a rusty iron key. For the shed, she told me and entrusted it into my palm, curling my fingers around it for me. I made my way through the long grass to the back of the house. There was a smattering of gravel back there and an unused rusting husk of a car. Moss grew over the hood and mildew covered the seats. The shed looked equally as dilapidated, and the bolt on the lock seemed like it would disintegrate at the slightest contact. When I slid the key in, thankfully it came open with a slow grind. I let it drop to the ground and slowly opened the rotting wooden door. I was met with the stench of death. I instantly recoiled, burying my nose in my elbow. It was a raccoon carcass that reminded me of a ketchup packet that had been stamped on. I grabbed a cobweb-covered shovel, scooped up the remains, and dumped them past an old picket fence. After a quick sign of the cross, I hauled a heavy manual lawnmower to the front yard. Clearing the scattered junk, mostly bits of washing machines, car parts, and dishwashers, felt like disturbing an archaeological site. I stacked what I could on the paved path, wondering how long it had been resting there. The lawnmower was a predictable nightmare. I had to stop every half a minute to untangle the blade or dump shredded grass from the painfully small basket. My only saving grace was that I arrived closer to the evening, since I reckoned the midday sun would have finished me off. After an hour, I'd only cut away a small clearing of overgrowth. To make matters worse, the dog, that mangy Alsatian I bumped into a few weeks before, was back. It sat near the tree line, judging me. I know it doesn't make sense to feel like your technique is being critiqued by a mutt, but that's what I felt in that moment. Eventually, some respite came when Layla came out to me, holding a glass of orange juice. "You missed a patch," she said teasingly. I pretended, and failed, to be annoyed as I took the glass of juice from her and attempted to down it in one. I failed at that too, and OJ came out of my nose as I coughed and spluttered. Layla burst into laughter. And once we both steadied ourselves, I asked her how she was finding Agatha. Good, she replied. "She's kinda intense and she loves to talk. Her favorite movie is Mary Poppins, which I can respect." I smiled, glad they were bonding. I never had a grandmother. One died before I was born and the other when I was an infant. I felt Agatha starting to fill that role for me in a sense. I made an unspoken obligation to continue my visits to her after the summer ended. Layla disappeared back inside, and I continued my moil for another hour or so. When I finished, I put the useless mower back in the shed before heading into the house, where I was greeted with a cool iced tea. I spoke with Agatha for a bit, explaining to her the work I did and what I'll do the next time I come, until Layla said it was time to go. We both got up and began our walk to the nearest bus stop, waving at the old lady as we walked down the path, which, I may add, was no longer infiltrated with weeds. Most of it, anyway. "So, what do you think of her?" I asked again, as we approached the bus stop, fishing for a more honest answer. "She's sweet," Layla replied. "Reminds me of my own grandma a lot." "Yeah, I get that," I muttered. "Strauss seems interesting," Layla said as we took our seats in the cramped glass enclosure next to the stop sign. "Did she give you the life story?" I asked with a chuckle. "She did," admitted Layla. "There were a few gaps in it, though." "Yeah," I exhaled. "She's old, I guess. It's Alzheimer's." "Oh, right. I thought it was something like that." "Yeah, poor woman," I said. "It's such a terrifying illness." "It is," Layla said glumly. There was a pause. The street lamps began to flicker on as the sun went to sleep. Then she spoke again. "He didn't have much to say." I looked at Layla, curious. "Who didn't?" I asked. "Strauss," she replied. "Agatha's husband." I let out a chuckle which comes to an abrupt end halfway through. "What do you mean he didn't have much to say?" I probed Layla further. "I mean," she began, slightly annoyed, "that he didn't have much to say when I saw him. Or, well, anything." There was a moment or two of silence. "You saw him?" I asked. Layla sighed. "Yeah, well, I mean, not really. He came down the stairs while I was talking to Agatha. She went over to him, but I didn't hear anything. I could just see his, legs." I froze as a sudden, painful realization crept over me. Agatha had told me her husband came home, and now this? In that moment, I knew what was happening. A relative of Agatha's had come to stay, and in her unending confusion, she convinced herself that it was her husband. This theory terrified me, as I'd always assumed that the last ounce of clarity the old woman would keep would be over her husband, her lover, the man she was married to for almost 50 years. I felt sick, imagining the cherished memories she made with Strauss over her lifetime crumbling to dust in her mind. "Did you see her carer today?" I asked Layla. "Georgia?" Layla replied. "Oh, is that her name?" I said, relieved I now knew without having to ask Georgia directly. "Yeah, and no. I didn't see her," Layla said. "Agatha told me she hadn't been around in days, like a week almost." "What the hell?" I barked. I sat back in the uncomfortable bench inside of the bus shelter, complete with the latest in anti-homeless technology. The sloped metal bar digging into my haunches worsened my mood. "They can't just leave her on her own like that," I continued. "She needs constant care. Just a week ago she was bedridden." Layla watched me as I grew furious and stood up. "I'm going back to her house. See how she is and who's with her. Make sure she's okay," I proclaimed. Layla arose from her sectioned off part of the bench and stood by me. "I'll come with you," she said. "It's fine, Layla. You can get the bus home. The next one is the last one anyways," I replied back. "I'm coming, okay? Besides, it's not like I have a curfew," she rebutted, and that was that. We both began the walk back to Agatha's house. In the late evening of the summer months, the world turns blue. It was this blue world that Layla and I crept through to return to the old lady's house. The walk back went quicker than we thought, and we were soon met with the familiar iron gate. I pushed it open with a long, drawn-out creak and began the trek up the walkway to the old and vulnerable abode. I felt an uneasy cloud waft around us as we drew closer to her home. It reached a boiling point as we both sensed something bounding towards us from amongst the remaining tall grass. It was the German Shepherd. Moments before, Layla and I both suffered from a shared heart attack. The dog revealed itself and trotted between us, begging for scratches and belly rubs. I let out a tentative exhale and patted the mutt just behind the ears as it unfurled its tongue. Layla mentioned something about the mortality rate of rabies, and I quickly recoiled my hand. The dog followed us the rest of the way to Agatha's front door, staying a short distance behind us. I knocked on the door and, as I assumed, received no answer. It was getting dark now, and Agatha wouldn't have been up this late on the best of days. I picked up a chipped gnome by the front step and fished out the front door key from under it. It slid into the lock, and I let myself inside. It was weird entering her home at night. The place had a perfect stillness about it, like he'd been left uninhabited for decades. Layla followed behind me, and the old dog stayed put on the front step, not putting a paw further. Layla was about to ascend the staircase when I veered off through the doorway on the right and made my way into the living room. The glass case, which once held the heirloom of Strauss's hooded mask, was now empty. "What's wrong?" Layla said as she crept up behind me, making me jump out of my skin. "The cabinet. It's empty," I replied. "Is it not supposed to be?" Layla said, puzzled. "I'm pretty sure it was earlier." Confused, Layla and I left the front room and climbed the stairs to the second floor. I led her down the corridor to Agatha's room, where I knocked gently on the door. After some time, there was no reply. It felt wrong, but I knew I would have to check inside. I gently opened the door and entered. My plan was to slowly shake the old woman awake, but that was foiled when Layla switched on the light, while I was barely halfway across the room. Agatha awoke, startled. I glared back at my girlfriend, who mouthed, "I'm sorry." What's going on?" Agatha stammered as she sat up in bed. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights. Agatha, it's me, Norman. It's fine, I just wanted to see if you're okay," I assured her. Gradually, she calmed as she recognized me. "Oh, Norman?" She paused and looked past me at the doorframe. "And who are you, my dear?" "My name is Layla," Layla confirmed as she stood next to me. "Such a lovely name," Agatha said absently. "Why the late visit?" Well, we just wanted to make sure that you were okay, since your carer abandoned you," I told the old woman earnestly. "I don't need Georgia anymore. My Strauss is back," she rasped. Layla and I exchanged a glance. "Which room is he in?" I asked, though I already suspected. "First on the right," she said. I left the musty room and walked down the short, equally musty hallway to Strauss's supposed bedroom. I knocked on the door and received no reply. I took the door handle in my palm and slowly opened it. As it cracked open, a torrent of flies escaped from within. Startled, I pushed the door open fully. Sat on the bed with his back to me was a figure. He wore a dark coat, as far as I could make out, and had a bone-white scalp. I quickly realized he was Strauss's hood mask. Suddenly, the funk from within the room hit me, and my sense of smell revolted against my body. I bent doubled at the grotesque stench that I could only describe as hot feces and roadkill. I took a step back into the hallway, but not before I noticed the stacks of pots and cups filled with a thick red corporeal liquid. As the figure stood, I ran to Agatha's room. "We need to leave," I commanded, taking hold of Layla's forearm. "Agatha, come with me." Agatha swung her frail legs out of bed, but didn't move much more. "Whatever for?" she asked and smiled. Allow me to justify myself for a second. I loved Agatha like she was my own grandmother, but she'd been living with whoever that was for days, maybe even weeks at that point, and no harm had come to her. This logic was sound in the moment, and I acted on it. I guided Layla out of the room and into the corridor, leaving Agatha where she was. The figure stood in the middle of the hall, dark and imposing. The hood mask, unworn for decades, was now pulled tight over his head. The two eye holes had only blackness behind them. His long black coat fell to his feet, which were hovering a few inches off the ground. At once he lunged, like an animalistic predator. His pale, bony hands forged a path to Layla's neck, and he slammed her against the wall. I was looking in her eyes as the light went out in them. Manic, I ran into Agatha's room and slammed the door shut behind me. It was quickly thrown open again by the figure, who calmly floated inside. I collapsed backwards, steadying myself only when I fell against an old bookshelf. Agatha got to her feet and stood in front of the figure. She put her hands tenderly on either side of its head. "Oh, Strauss, my love," she whispered. She curled her fingers under the rim of the hood mask and carefully, as she'd done hundreds of times before with her husband, raised it from his face. Suddenly, Agatha soured. You're not my Strauss," she said in a moment of perfect clarity. The figure, in turn, put its hand on either side of Agatha's face. Before she could squirm away, it dived down, sinking two haggard canine teeth into her neck. It lapped up what blood it could, feverishly, before letting the old woman crumple to the floor, still holding her husband's mask. Then, it locked its attention on me. I glanced to my side, realizing my only hope of survival was the large window. I clambered to it and pushed it open as far as it could go as I heard movement behind me. I felt vomit rise in my throat and jumped. My ankle shattered. The bone turned into a jigsaw puzzle as soon as I hit the cement. I gasped through the pain and tried to walk. Every few steps I'd collapse back down on my hands and knees. I kept the routine going as I made my way to the front of the house. I didn't look back, even when I heard gentle landing of the figure as it floated down from Agatha's room. I aimed for the grass, trying to give me torn knees and palms respite from the gravel. As soon as I reached the green edge, I collapsed onto my back. The figure was standing in front of me. It was now that I finally got a good look at the thing's face. Its skin was as white as the hood mask, interrupted only by the blackness of its eyes and the redness that caked its gullet and neck. Its sockets were empty, filled only with a dark bile. I could have sworn I saw a torn nerve dangling from the gape. Its nose looked like it had been ravaged by some wasting disease like leprosy or syphilis, maybe both. The same was true for its non-existent ears and lips. Its teeth looked like scattered bits of broken glass, loosely attached to wilting gums. All but its top canines, which were in mint condition. That thing that had been masquerading as Strauss already had more than its feed of blood for the night, but with the way it approached me, I could tell it wanted more. The German Shepherd bared its teeth and snarled. The figure, which had been floating just off the ground on stump-like feet, rotated to look, if it even could, at the source of the growling. As it did, the large dog pounced. Its weight slammed into the figure, knocked both to the ground. I started to crawl to the large patch of long grass I had left uncut. A rusty mattress spring jutting from the earth snagged my pocket, spilling out lint and an empty packet of apple-flavored gum. Just before I dragged myself into that haven, I looked back. I was just in time to see the mutt clamp its fangs around the bottom jaw of the figure, ripping and tearing it from its head. I tumbled onto the grass, landing painfully on an old, discarded garden hoe. Taking my phone from my pocket, I rang the police and managed to stutter out what was happening. I gave them the address I'd memorized weeks before and hung up. Every word I spoke aloud felt like yelling out my exact location. I tore the old garden tool from the soil and used it as a makeshift crutch as I limped down the path. I was moving painfully slow, with each step feeling like an electric shock, zapping through my legs and up my spine. I could hear the distant battle behind me, the yelping of the dog interspersed with the otherworldly calls of that thing. And after what felt like days, I reached the street. I staggered down rows of high brick walls and foliage. My only thought was going forward, away from that killer. I still hadn't gone as far as the bus stop when I heard the noise. It was a rapid pitter-pattern. I turned to see the figure sprinting down the road with the speed of an Olympic athlete and the intent of a starving big cat. Its stump feet left trails of gunk behind it on the road, meat scraped away by the rough asphalt. I barely had time to react before it leapt on me, but it did. I jabbed the hoe at it, feeling like a lion tamer. The dull metal tip collided with its chest, and I felt the rotted wood snap as it did. It lunged, its top teeth sharp and ready to rip, its bottom teeth still somewhere in Agatha's garden. And then it was flung back. Its reaction to having the stake-like wooden handle plunged into the approximate location of its heart was immediate and extreme. It was downed for all of 5 seconds before it stood again. I wept and clutched the other half of the hoe to my chest, the sharp, splintered edge pointing outward. The figure staggered uneasily towards me, the accidental stake still protruding from its chest. Suddenly, a spurt of black gunk erupted from its mushy skull. I took a step to the side and turned to its new assailant. The crowd of police officers opened fire as it tried to charge towards them. I put my fingers in my ears and collapsed to the ground as they fired round after round, finally putting an end to any twitch or jerk from the decrepit body. A woman in uniform took me from my hiding spot and led me away from the scene. The rest of that night was a blur. In fact, the rest of that year was a blur. The only other bit that I remember from that night was being sat down in the cop car by the lady who'd found me and having the weirdest conversation of my whole life. She told me that in October of the year prior, there'd been an apparent murder-suicide. On Halloween night, 2 boys were brutally killed by their Sunday school teacher, who then took his own life. I knew the story well, as Gary, the supposed killer, had taught me. The cop told me that this was a baseless rumor, that she'd been a first responder that night. What she saw in that house was no mentally ill zealot. It was a monster. It was the figure. It was what had escaped her that night, and immediately after went on to pose as the dead husband of an elderly woman, for longer than I could have imagined. And that's the end of this little Halloween story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know your comments below. And if you didn't, well, I guess that's fine too. There's other stories. But wherever you are, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you did. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you for choosing this story to listen to. And a huge shout out once again to my patrons for your support all this time. Take care now. Bye-bye then.